The house where Luciana and Roberto built 25 years of history seemed to shrink with each bill that arrived, as if the drywall and plaster ceiling absorbed the unspoken tensions. The smell of coffee in the morning, once a welcoming invitation to the day, was replaced by the bitter taste of silence, dense and oppressive in wealth and in poverty. Discovered the hard way that silent poverty was the most devastating of all adversities. It resonates with the painful reality of millions of couples across the United States who face bankruptcy together, but in isolation, without the essential dialogue that could save them. Financial crisis, when not addressed with empathy, planning, and communication, shakes not only the marriage, but also individual self-esteem and inner peace, transforming homes into silent battlegrounds. Silence, after all, cost them everything: tranquility, stability, and for a time, the very essence of their relationship. The journey of Luciana and Roberto, and so many other couples, is a warning and a call to action, showing that rebuilding financial life together invariably begins with the courage to break the silence. It corroded love and hope from the inside out, without a single word being said about the elephant in the room, money, or the lack thereof. Each unpaid bill, each ignored collection call, each averted glance from one another were bricks in the construction of an invisible wall of resentment and fear. Pride prevented them from talking. Shame silenced them, and the belief that everything would work out kept them in a dangerous state of denial. And the vibrant laughter that echoed through the hallways gave way to suppressed sighs, almost inaudible, yet heavy with deep pain. The American dream, once tangible and palpable in their cozy suburban Ohio home, with its well-maintained lawn and the promise of a secure future, was now mercilessly crumbling under piles of credit card bills that accumulated on the kitchen table, silent witnesses to a downfall. Roberto's unexpected layoff at 58, after decades of dedication to the same manufacturing company, was a blow that caught them off guard. He, a man who had always prided himself on his stability and provision, now found himself empty-handed. His self-esteem shattered, an uncertain future. Added to this, Luciana's health crisis at 55, which required expensive and untimely treatments, opened a financial crater that swallowed not only the stability they cherished so much, but worse, the mutual trust that should have been the rock of their relationship. Credit cards, once seen as convenient tools, transformed into a dangerous momentary solution, a mirage that promised relief, but soon proved to be a deep, bottomless hole, a trap. They, who had sworn to be together in sickness and in health. This initial episode is not just Luciana and Roberto's story. On a rainy autumn morning in Seattle, as raindrops gently tapped against their home office window, Sarah, a talented 42-year-old graphic designer, felt a chilling sensation in her spine that had nothing to do with the weather. Upon opening her online bank statement, the balance, once comfortable and a source of security, was now deep in the red, a digital scarlet stain that seemed to scream her ruin. Automatic withdrawals from her savings account, once a reserve for the future, mistaking them for temporary tight spots. These signs include living paycheck to paycheck. A fundamental technique to regain control is the creation of a detailed and rigorous budget. Sarah and Mark, advised by a certified financial planner they found online, began recording every cent spent, meticulously categorizing their expenses. Initially, the exercise was painful and revealing, exposing the extent of their unnecessary spending on dining out, unused subscription services, and impulsive purchases at department stores. They also implemented the 50-30-20th rule, a simple and effective method, allocating 50% of income to needs, 30% to wants, and 20% to savings and debt repayment. This structure helped them visualize where their money was actually going and prioritize their spending consciously. In addition, they began holding weekly financial meetings, a safe and non-judgmental space to discuss their finances openly, share concerns, and celebrate small victories, with no surplus for unforeseen events. Using credit cards to pay basic bills, which indicates a dangerous dependence. Constantly maxing out credit card limits, signaling credit exhaustion. Frequently receiving collection calls, a clear indicator of overdue payments. Or constantly feeling anxious, stressed, and hopeless because of money. The lack of an emergency fund, chronic reliance on credit to sustain lifestyle, and the absence of a clear and strictly followed budget are strong indicators that the financial situation is rapidly deteriorating and that intervention is urgent. To cover basic daily expenses had become a painful routine, a daily reminder that they were living far beyond their means. She and her husband, Mark, a 45-year-old software developer, had an apparently stable life with two school-aged daughters, Emily and Chloe. By facing the reality of their debts head-on, with honesty and courage, and by adopting a concrete and disciplined action plan, they managed to halt the downward spiral that was pulling them under. The concrete result of this paradigm shift was that, in just 6 months, they not only stopped using credit cards to cover basic expenses, but also managed to start paying off smaller debts, freeing up cash flow for larger ones. The relief was not just financial. Open communication about money, once a taboo, strengthened the couple's relationship, replacing paralyzing fear with renewed hope and suffocating anxiety with collaboration. They learned that bankruptcy is not an inevitable destination, but rather a warning that can be transformed into a powerful opportunity to rebuild a stronger financial foundation and, more importantly, a more transparent, robust, and resilient marriage. Honesty, however painful, was the bedrock of their recovery, and an up-to-date mortgage on their dream home in the Ballard neighborhood. However, behind the facade of normality lay a mountain of credit card debt, accumulated silently over years of impulsive spending on electronics, clothes, and expensive restaurants, coupled with the rising cost of their daughter's education, which included ballet classes, soccer, and tutoring. Each month, the suffocating feeling grew, tightening around them like an invisible tourniquet. The fear of answering the phone due to incessant collection calls, many from unknown numbers, became a constant torment. The conversation about money was always postponed, an uncomfortable topic pushed under the rug at every opportunity, transforming small problems into financial snowballs that now threatened to bury them. Sarah and Mark's story is a painful mirror for millions of Americans who find themselves in a similar situation, living on the brink of financial collapse without realizing the warning signs. According to data from the American Bankruptcy Institute and Federal Reserve reports, the number of individual bankruptcy filings, while fluctuating, has shown an upward trend in recent years, especially after economic crises and periods of inflation, driven by complex factors such as high healthcare costs, which can devastate budgets even with insurance, unexpected unemployment, wage stagnation, and chronic debt mismanagement. Credit card debt, for example, has reached record levels, with the average debt per family in 2024 exceeding tens of thousands of dollars, a heavy burden for most households. Many couples, like Sarah and Mark, fail to identify the early warning signs of bankruptcy. Identifying these signs is not only the first, but the most crucial step towards recovery. The lesson learned by Sarah and Mark was that denial is, indeed, the biggest enemy of financial health. In Phoenix, Arizona, under the relentless desert sun, the lives of Michael and Emily, a young couple with two small children, aged 3 and 5, crumbled with the speed of a sandcastle in high tide. Emily, a dedicated elementary school teacher, unexpectedly lost her job when the school district underwent severe budget cuts. Michael, with a modest salary as an IT technician, struggled bravely to cover the growing household expenses alone, which included high rent in a good school district, the exorbitant cost of daycare for their youngest child, and unexpected medical bills for their oldest child. who had developed a severe food allergy. They had good intentions to save, dreaming of having a reserve. But the reality of daily expenses consistently outpaced their combined incomes. Little by little, personal loans to cover budget gaps and credit cards, with their enticing limits, became the only apparent way to keep the household running, to ensure their children had everything they needed. A vicious cycle of debt that quickly brought them to the brink of financial and emotional collapse. The stress was palpable, a heavy air that hung over the family, and arguments about money were daily, eroding the affection and patience that united them. Michael and Emily's story perfectly illustrates what financial experts point to as the main and most recurrent causes of personal bankruptcy in the United States. According to studies by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and NerdWallet, credit card debt is consistently one of the biggest contributors, with millions of families burdened by exorbitant interest rates that turn small balances into unmanageable mountains, forcing them to make only minimum payments, which barely reduce the principal. Furthermore, unexpected medical expenses are a devastating and often uncontrollable factor. Even with health insurance, the complexity of the system and high copays and deductibles can lead to sky-high bills that, for many families, mean financial ruin. Unemployment or abrupt income reduction, as in Emily's case, are also powerful triggers for bankruptcy, as they destabilize the family budget suddenly and overwhelmingly without time to adapt. Other critical factors include poor debt management, where the lack of a payment plan and misguided spending priorities exacerbate the problem. The absence of a robust emergency fund, which should cover 3 to 6 months of essential expenses and serve as a cushion for unforeseen events. And unbridled consumerism, driven by a culture of buy now, pay later that glorifies debt and instant gratification. Federal Reserve data from 2024 shows that total household debt in the U.S. continues to grow, surpassing the $17 trillion mark, highlighting the systemic vulnerability of many households and the urgent need for financial education and planning to combat these entrenched causes and offer a path to recovery. Experts like Dave Ramsey suggest a multifaceted and disciplined approach. One of the most effective techniques is the debt snowball principle for debt repayment. Michael and Emily, inspired by success stories of ordinary people who overcame debt, began listing all their debts, from the smallest to the largest in value, regardless of the interest rate. They committed to paying the minimum amount on all debts, except for the smallest one, to which they directed all the extra money they could save or generate. Once the smallest debt was paid off, the amount previously allocated to it was added to the payment of the next debt on the list, creating an increasingly larger and faster snowball effect. To complement this strategy, they sought credit counseling from a nonprofit agency, which helped them negotiate lower interest rates with creditors and consolidate some of their debts into a debt management plan, reducing the number of monthly payments and simplifying the repayment process. The central lesson for Michael and Emily was that knowledge is power, especially when it comes to personal finance. By understanding the common pitfalls that lead to debt and by applying proven strategies and discipline, they began to regain control of their financial lives. The concrete result of this dedication was impressive. In 1 year, they managed to completely eliminate the debt on 3 of their credit cards and significantly reduce the balance of their personal loans. Peace and hope returned to their home, and arguments about money were replaced by future plans, by conversations about how they would save for their children's college. They learned that bankruptcy is often not a result of bad faith or irresponsibility, but rather a combination of unexpected events and, crucially, a lack of financial education and planning. By arming themselves with knowledge, adopting discipline, and acting proactively, they managed to avoid the worst-case scenario and pave the way for a more secure, prosperous financial future and, most importantly, a stronger and more resilient marital relationship, built on a foundation of communication and mutual support. In Miami, Florida, Under the scorching sun that blurred reality, the lives of Carlos and Sofia, an immigrant couple full of dreams who worked tirelessly to build a prosperous future for their family, were abruptly shaken. Carlos's small construction business, which he had built with so much sweat and dedication, finally decided to face reality and thoroughly explore proven financial recovery strategies. The first measure they implemented was debt negotiation, which involves directly contacting creditors to try to reduce the amounts owed, interest rates, or establish more flexible payment plans. To their surprise, they discovered that many creditors are, in fact, willing to negotiate, preferring to receive a portion of the debt rather than facing a debtor's bankruptcy process, which would result in total losses. In addition, they considered debt consolidation, transferring multiple loans and credit card balances to a single loan with a lower interest rate and a single monthly payment. This drastically simplified their finances, reduced their interest burden, and made it easier to control. Another crucial technique they adopted was the zero-based budget method, where every dollar of income has a defined purpose even before the month begins. This approach forced them to be proactive and intentional with their money, eliminating invisible expenses and ensuring that every cent was working towards their recovery. Faced a devastating series of canceled projects and delayed payments. With their income drastically reduced and the cost of living in the city, no matter how small, is always infinitely better than inaction and paralysis by fear. By facing their debts head-on, with courage and determination, and by consistently applying these strategies, they not only began to see the light at the end of the tunnel, but also regained their dignity, hope, and confidence in themselves and their future. The concrete and remarkable result of this change in attitude and discipline was that, in 18 months, they managed to reduce their debts by more than 40%, which allowed them to breathe financially and even begin to build a small, yet vital, emergency fund. Open communication about money, once a taboo that led to arguments and resentment, became a pillar of their marriage, strengthening their union and partnership. They learned that getting out of a financial hole is not a miracle that happens by chance, but rather the direct result of hard work, relentless discipline, and, fundamentally, the courage to seek and apply the right solutions, transforming despair into resilience and debt into freedom. Already notoriously high, rising every month, they quickly found themselves drowning in bills. The dreams of buying their own home in a good neighborhood and providing a quality education for their children, once so vivid, seemed to fade day by day, replaced by a growing sense of despair. The stress and shame prevented them from seeking help, which was a common mistake, and the fear of losing everything, their rented home, the car that took them to work, their children's stability, became a constant, testing the limits of their marriage and their resilience. The hope of a new beginning in the U.S. was turning into a nightmare of debt and uncertainty. Carlos and Sofia's situation reflects the harsh reality of many Americans who suddenly find themselves in a debt pit, desperately seeking a way out. Recent data from the Federal Reserve and the Bureau of Economic Analysis show that, although the economy may appear strong on the surface, the personal savings rate in the U.S. has been volatile, and a significant portion of households live without a robust emergency reserve, which makes them extremely vulnerable to unexpected financial shocks, such as job loss or illness. Financial recovery does not just require cutting expenses, although that is crucial, but requires, above all, a profound change in mindset and the implementation of concrete strategies, discipline, and persistence. Financial personal finance experts, such as Sue Zorman, Dave Ramsey, and Ramit Sethi, frequently emphasize the importance of a clear, personalized action plan and unwavering discipline to follow it, even in the face of adversity. Procrastination, the belief that the problem will solve itself, and the lack of knowledge about available options for dealing with debt are common and dangerous barriers to recovery. Carlos and Sofia, at the suggestion of a close friend who had gone through a similar situation, The most important and transformative lesson for Carlos and Sofia was that action. In the vibrant and tech-driven landscape of Austin, Texas, Jessica, a bright young software engineering graduate with a promising job at a thriving startup, seemed to have it all: intelligence, ambition, and an enviable salary. However, behind the facade of success and a bustling social life, her financial situation was a tangled mess of mistakes, a minefield of impulsive decisions, and a complete lack of planning. She lived a lifestyle she clearly couldn't sustain, which allows for excessive and invisible spending. The uncontrolled accumulation of consumer debt, driven by credit cards and financing for non-essential items. The absence of an emergency fund. Jessica learned was that true financial power does not lie in how much you earn, but in how well and how intentionally you manage what you have. By investing heavily in her financial education and, more importantly, in its practical application, she radically transformed her relationship with money, from a source of anxiety to a tool of empowerment. The concrete and inspiring result of this paradigm shift was that, in just 2 years, she managed not only to build a robust emergency fund capable of covering 6 months of expenses, but also significantly reduced her student loan debt by over 50%, which should cover 3 to 6 months of essential expenses, leaving people at the mercy of unforeseen events. Procrastination in saving for retirement, which compromises long-term future security. And investing without prior knowledge or research, which can lead to significant losses. These mistakes, while seemingly small and isolated in daily life, accumulate insidiously over time, transforming into serious financial problems that appear insurmountable. With luxury cars leased and swapped every few months, expensive dinners at trendy restaurants nightly, continuous and practical financial education is absolutely fundamental. Jessica, in a moment of clarity and despair, decided to change her course and began to fervently dedicate herself to studying and applying the principles of personal finance. One technique that helped her reverse her situation was automatic saving, where a fixed percentage of her salary was automatically transferred to a high-yield savings account and another to investments in an index fund as soon as the money hit her account. This eliminated the temptation to spend the money before even having the chance to save. She also adopted the principle of paying yourself first, prioritizing saving and investing before any other consumption expense. Furthermore, she delved deep into understanding compound interest, realizing with crystal clear clarity the exponential power that time and reinvestment have in the growth of her capital over decades. For her debts, she implemented the strategy of accelerated amortization for her student loans, making extra payments whenever possible to reduce the principal amount and, consequently, the total interest paid over the life of the loan. Impulsive last-minute trips to exotic destinations and a growing collection of designer clothes. Despite her considerable income, money always ran out long before the end of the month, and the student loans that helped her finance her prestigious education seemed an insurmountable burden, with minimum payments barely touching the principal. She naively believed that earning more would solve all her problems, failing to realize that the core issue was a fundamental lack of knowledge about how to manage her money. With each new debt incurred, the financial freedom she so desperately sought became more distant, and anxiety about her financial future began to dominate her thoughts, eroding her confidence and joy. Jessica's story is a classic and unsettling example of how the absence or poor quality of financial education can sabotage even high-income individuals with great potential for success. In the United States, financial literacy is still not effectively taught universally in schools and universities, leaving millions of young people unprepared for the challenges of the real world, from debt management to retirement planning. Research from the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority and the Council for Economic Education consistently shows that a significant portion of the American population cannot answer basic questions about essential financial concepts, such as compound interest, inflation, investment diversification, or the impact of minimum debt payments, making them extremely vulnerable to costly financial mistakes and debt. The most common financial mistakes that lead to debt and instability include the lack of a clear and strictly followed budget. To avoid these mistakes and build a solid financial foundation, the deepest and most transformative lesson. In a quiet university town in North Carolina, with its tree-lined streets and historic buildings, David and Rachel, a couple of dedicated university professors, felt that their incomes, though stable and comfortable, were not enough to achieve their ambitious long-term goals. Buying a larger house that could accommodate their growing family, and more importantly, ensuring their children's college education without the burden of student loans. They lived comfortably, without excessive luxuries, but the rising cost of living in the region and salary stagnation in academia made them feel trapped, with little room for financial growth. Research from the Pew Research Center and the Federal Reserve indicates that reliance on a single source of income makes families vulnerable to economic crises, unexpected layoffs, or health problems, and significantly limits long-term financial growth potential. Statistics show that income diversification through side hustles or parallel businesses and smart, strategic investing are fundamental pillars for building sustainable long-term wealth and creating financial freedom. However, many individuals don't know how to start this process, feeling intimidated by the investment market, which seems complex and risky, or by the idea of starting something new. The consumerist culture prevalent in the U.S. often leads people to spend any extra income generated, rather than investing for the future, perpetuating the cycle of salary dependence. Lack of knowledge about passive income options and the irrational fear of losing money in the market are significant barriers that prevent most people from taking the first step. The strong desire to provide more for their family to offer opportunities they themselves might not have had was strong, but lack of time, due to the demands of their professions and the fear of risking the little they had, prevented them from exploring new financial avenues. They dreamed of having more financial freedom, of being able to make choices without the burden of budget constraints, but they didn't know where to start to increase their incomes beyond their main jobs, which already consumed most of their time and energy. David and Rachel's situation is a faithful reflection of the reality for many middle-class Americans who, despite having good jobs, desperately seek to increase their saving and investment capacity to achieve their dreams. To overcome these limitations and turn their dreams into reality, David and Rachel decided together to thoroughly explore strategies for extra income and smart investments. First, they inventoried their passions, hobbies, and skills that could be monetized. Rachel, who had a hidden passion and innate talent for baking, turned her hobby into a small source of income. She started selling custom cakes and fine pastries for local events and birthday parties on weekends, advertising in mom groups and on social media. Surprisingly, her schedule quickly filled up, turning her hobby into a lucrative side hustle. David, with his extensive knowledge in academic writing and editing, began offering consulting and text review services for university students and small local businesses in his spare time, using online freelance platforms. These side hustles, as they are affectionately called in the U.S., generated significant additional income, which they directed entirely towards investments and saving for their house. Regarding investments, they adopted a pragmatic and long-term approach, investing in index funds. These funds, traded on stock exchanges, replicate the performance of a broad market index, such as the S&P 500, offering instant diversification and good long-term average returns with very low management costs. This strategy, widely recommended by renowned investors like Warren Buffett, for most people who don't have the time or knowledge to select individual stocks, allowed them to participate in market growth without the need for constant monitoring or extensive technical knowledge. They also automated their investments, setting up automatic monthly transfers to their index funds, ensuring consistency and taking advantage of dollar-cost averaging. The most valuable and empowering lesson for David and Rachel was that inertia is indeed the biggest enemy of financial growth and dream realization. By taking the initiative to seek and create new income streams and by investing smartly and disciplined, they significantly expanded their financial horizons. The concrete and transformative result of their efforts was that, in just 3 years, the extra income they generated allowed them to save enough for a down payment on a larger house and, most importantly, to start a considerable college fund for their children, ensuring they would have the best educational opportunities. They discovered that creating multiple income streams and strategic, automated investing not only accelerated their financial goals, but also gave them a deep sense of security, control, and freedom over their future. They learned that the path to financial freedom is not just about what you save or what you spend, but also about what you create, how you multiply money wisely, and above all, the courage to step out of your comfort zone and turn dreams into reality through action.